"Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Natalie didn't even look up from her phone as she delivered what should have been the most joyous news of our marriage. Instead, she scrolled through Instagram while picking at her cold chicken dinner, as casual as if she'd mentioned the weather. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. We hadn't been intimate in 6 months. Not once. That's wonderful, honey," I managed, forcing the words through a throat that felt like sandpaper. She finally glanced up, her expression flat. "Guess miracles happen when you finally let your guard down, huh?" I nodded and smiled, but inside, something fundamental shattered. Because what Natalie didn't know, what no one except my doctor knew, was that I'd been completely sterile since the age of 13. A childhood illness had destroyed any possibility of fatherhood. The diagnosis was absolute, permanent, medically impossible to reverse. My wife was pregnant, and it definitely wasn't mine. My name is Liam Matthews, and until that moment, I thought I had it all figured out. At 32, I was a senior software engineer at a respected tech firm in downtown Seattle. Not flashy work, but it paid well and gave me the stability I'd always craved. I wasn't the type to chase dreams or take wild risks. I was the guy people called reliable, steady, the one who showed up. That's probably what attracted Natalie to me in the first place. We'd met 4 years ago at a coffee shop near my office. She was a marketing coordinator for a local agency, vibrant and outgoing in all the ways I wasn't. Where I was methodical, she was spontaneous. Where I was quiet, she filled rooms with laughter. We balanced each other perfectly, or so I thought. Our courtship was a whirlwind by my standards. Within 6 months, she'd moved into my apartment. Within a year, I'd proposed with my grandmother's ring, getting down on one knee in the same coffee shop where we'd met. She said yes before I could finish my rehearsed speech, tears streaming down her face as she pulled me up for a kiss that tasted like forever. The wedding was everything she'd dreamed of. A garden ceremony in her parents' backyard, filled with white roses and string lights. I wore my father's watch and cried when she walked down the aisle in her grandmother's dress. When we exchanged vows, I meant every word. In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. I was committing to forever with the woman I loved more than anything in the world. For the first 2 years of marriage, we were genuinely happy. Natalie would curl up next to me on the couch while I worked on side projects, her head on my shoulder as she scrolled through Pinterest, planning our future. We talked about buying a house, maybe getting a dog first to practice being responsible for something together. She'd joke about my methodical nature, calling me her beautiful, boring husband in a way that felt affectionate rather than cutting. I knew about my infertility, of course. The illness had struck when I was 13, a severe case of mumps that led to orchitis, leaving me sterile. The doctors had been clear. There was 0 chance of natural conception. But I'd never told Natalie. It wasn't that I was hiding it maliciously. The topic just never came up naturally in our early relationship, and by the time it might have mattered, we were so happy that bringing up such a devastating piece of my past felt like it would only cast a shadow over our joy. I always planned to tell her. When we started seriously trying for kids, I would have come clean and we could have explored adoption or other options together. But we weren't there yet. We were still in the phase of talking about someday and when we're ready. My best friend Eric knew, though. He'd been there during my illness, visiting me in the hospital when we were both awkward teenagers. Eric Thornton had been my closest friend since childhood, the brother I'd never had. Where I was reserved, he was charming. Where I was cautious, he was bold. He worked in sales for a medical device company and had the kind of easy confidence that made everyone want to be around him. Eric had been my best man at the wedding. He'd thrown me an epic bachelor party, given a heartfelt speech about how Natalie was perfect for me, and had been genuinely thrilled when I'd found happiness. His own marriage to Jessica was solid. They had 2 young kids and seemed genuinely content with their suburban life. Or at least, that's what I'd believed until 6 months ago. The changes in Natalie started subtly, like a slowly leaking tire that you don't notice until it's completely flat. At first, I attributed her shifting mood to work stress. Her agency had landed a big client, and she was putting in longer hours, coming home exhausted and irritable. But then the comments started. "You know, Brad from accounting got promoted again," she'd say over dinner, not quite looking at me. "He's only been there 2 years. Isn't it funny how some people just go after what they want?" I'd nod and make supportive noises, figuring she was just venting about office politics. But the comments kept coming, each one with a little more edge. "I saw Sarah's husband bought her that convertible she wanted. Must be nice to be married to someone with ambition." "Jennifer's husband started his own consulting firm. Took a risk, you know. Some people aren't afraid to bet on themselves." Each comment felt like a small paper cut, insignificant alone, but they started to add up. I tried to address it directly a few times, asking if everything was okay, if she was unhappy with our life together. She'd always deflect, saying she was just tired or stressed, and I'd let it drop because confrontation had never been my strong suit. The physical distance started around the same time. She'd turn away when I tried to kiss her goodbye in the morning. When I reached for her hand during movies, she'd find a reason to get up and grab something from the kitchen. Our conversations became perfunctory exchanges about schedules and household tasks. The real warning sign should have been her phone. Natalie had never been secretive about her devices before. We'd even shared passwords for convenience. But suddenly her phone was always face down, always locked, always just out of reach. When notifications came in during dinner, she'd glance at them with a look I couldn't quite identify. Not guilt, exactly, but something close to it. "New work thing," she'd explain when I asked about the late-night texting. "You know how crazy things have been?" I wanted to believe her. God, how desperately I wanted to believe her. The final straw before the pregnancy announcement came 3 weeks earlier. I'd surprised her by coming home early from work with takeout from her favorite Thai place, thinking we could have a nice dinner together and maybe talk through whatever was bothering her. I found her in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of our bed, phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing, really laughing, the way she used to laugh with me, and her whole face was lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. "No, you're terrible," she was saying, her voice warm and playful. "You can't just say things like that and expect me to—" "What?" She paused, listening, then laughed again. "You know exactly what you're doing." When she saw me in the doorway, the light in her eyes died instantly. "I have to go," she said quickly into the phone. "Yeah, I'll talk to you later." She hung up and turned to me with a bright, artificial smile. "Hey, honey, you're home early." "Who was that?" I asked, setting the takeout on the dresser. "Oh, just Jennifer from work. Girl talk, you know how it is." But I'd heard her laughing with Jennifer before, and this wasn't the same tone. This was intimate, flirtatious, the way she used to talk to me when we were first dating. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together all the small signs I'd been ignoring. The late nights, the phone calls, the distance, the criticism that seemed designed to push me away. I wanted to be wrong. I prayed I was wrong. But 3 weeks later, when she casually announced her pregnancy without even looking up from her phone, I knew with absolute certainty that my worst fears were true. That night, after Natalie had gone to bed, I sat in my home office with the door locked, staring at my medical records on the computer screen. The diagnosis was right there in black and white. Complete azoospermia, secondary to bilateral orchitis. Patient advised of permanent sterility. 0 probability of natural conception. The date on the report was nearly 20 years old, but the condition was irreversible. There was no question, no room for doubt, no medical miracle that could explain what Natalie had just told me. My wife was carrying another man's child, and she was planning to pass it off as mine. I sat there in the dark for hours, cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine. Grief for the marriage I thought I had, rage at the betrayal, humiliation at being played for a fool. But underneath it all, a cold clarity began to settle in. Natalie wasn't just cheating on me. She was preparing to trap me in a lie that would define the rest of my life. She was going to let me believe I was a father, let me love and support a child that wasn't mine, all while carrying on her affair behind my back. The deception was so profound, so calculated, that it took my breath away. I thought about confronting her, demanding the truth, maybe even proposing couples therapy to work through this crisis. But as I sat there, remembering months of subtle cruelty and deliberate distance, I realized something important. Natalie had already made her choice. She'd chosen her affair partner over our marriage. She'd chosen deception over honesty. She'd chosen to destroy our life together rather than have the courage to end it cleanly. So why should I give her the easy way out? If Natalie wanted to play games, if she wanted to manipulate and deceive, then I'd show her exactly what those games looked like when played by someone who was actually good at them. She'd underestimated me, dismissed me as boring and predictable. That was going to be her biggest mistake. I opened a new document on my computer and started typing. Not an emotional rant or a letter I'd never send, but a methodical plan. If my wife wanted to destroy our marriage, she was going to face the consequences of that choice. But she'd do it on my terms, not hers. The Liam she'd married was steady and reliable. Boring, according to her. But boring people are often the most dangerous when they finally decide to act, because nobody sees them coming. I was done being the faithful husband. It was time to be something else entirely. Over the next week, I became a different person. To Natalie, I remained the same supportive husband, maybe even more attentive than before. But in my private moments, I was planning the most comprehensive revenge of my life. The first step was gathering evidence. I needed to know exactly who she was sleeping with, how long it had been going on, and how deep the betrayal ran. I suspected it was Eric. The timing of his recent increased presence in our social circle, combined with Natalie's new interest in work events that seemed to coincide with his business trips, painted a clear picture. But I needed proof. I started with our shared iCloud account. Natalie had never been particularly tech-savvy, and she'd never bothered to create separate accounts for our devices. Within an hour of careful searching, I had access to her complete message history, photo backups, and location data going back months. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The affair had been going on for 4 months. It had started as flirtatious texting after a group dinner where I'd had to leave early for a work emergency. Eric had messaged her the next day, ostensibly to check if I'd gotten my work situation resolved, but the conversation had quickly turned personal. The messages were painful to read. Eric was everything Natalie apparently wanted, and I wasn't. Spontaneous, exciting, willing to take risks. Their text conversations were filled with inside jokes, stolen moments, and increasingly explicit content. Photos I'd never seen of my wife in lingerie I'd never seen her wear. Plans for meetups when I was at work or traveling. But the worst part was reading Natalie's complaints about me. How I was safe to the point of being boring. How she felt trapped in a life that's going nowhere. How Eric made her feel alive again in a way Liam never could. The location data confirmed what the messages suggested. Regular meetings at a boutique hotel downtown, always on days when I was working late or traveling for business. They'd been careful to avoid places where they might be recognized, but not careful enough to think about digital footprints. Armed with this information, I hired a private investigator. Marcus Webb was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases. I paid him in cash and gave him everything I'd gathered, asking him to document their affair with photo and video evidence that would hold up in court. While Marcus worked on surveillance, I made an appointment with my doctor under the pretense of a routine checkup. I needed updated medical documentation of my sterility, complete with official letterhead and recent test results. Dr. Harrison was puzzled by my request for such comprehensive fertility testing, but he complied when I explained that my wife and I were thinking about starting a family and wanted to be thorough. The results were exactly what I expected: complete sterility, medically impossible to father children. Dr. Harrison offered his sympathies and started discussing adoption options, but I cut him off. I had everything I needed. The final piece was legal preparation. I consulted with a divorce attorney, Catherine Morrison, who specialized in high-conflict cases. I explained the situation in clinical detail, providing her with copies of all my evidence. She was impressed by the thoroughness of my documentation and assured me that I had an ironclad case for fault-based divorce. "Your wife's infidelity is well documented," she said, reviewing the materials. "Combined with the pregnancy fraud, you'll have significant leverage in settlement negotiations. Washington is a no-fault state, but adultery can still impact asset division, especially when there's evidence of deception regarding paternity." We prepared divorce papers that would hit Natalie like a nuclear bomb. Full asset protection for me, including our home and retirement accounts, a claim for emotional damages, and most importantly, a complete disavowal of paternity for the child she was carrying. But I wasn't planning to serve her quietly in some lawyer's office. I had something much more devastating in mind. The key was timing. I needed to wait until the pregnancy was far enough along that Natalie would be fully committed to the lie, but not so far that she could claim I'd accepted paternity by waiting too long. I also needed Eric to be completely invested in their relationship, maybe even planning to leave his own wife. Marcus's surveillance reports were providing exactly the ammunition I needed. Photos of them entering and leaving hotels, video of them kissing in his car outside her office, documentation of a relationship that was clearly serious, not just a fling, but the most damning evidence came from a piece of luck I couldn't have planned for. During one of their hotel meetings, Natalie had apparently had some pregnancy-related morning sickness. The hotel housekeeping staff had thrown away tissues and other materials that contained trace amounts of fetal DNA, genetic material that could be tested for paternity. Through a contact Marcus had in the medical field, we were able to obtain samples for DNA testing. It was a legal gray area, but not technically illegal since the materials had been discarded as medical waste. The test results were definitive. Eric Thornton was the biological father of Natalie's baby. With all the evidence compiled, I was ready for the final phase of my plan. But I still needed the perfect moment to execute it. A time when both Natalie and Eric would be completely exposed, with no room to deny or deflect. That opportunity came when Natalie suggested we have a small celebration dinner for the pregnancy announcement. She wanted to invite both sets of parents, plus Eric and Jessica, our closest friends. An intimate gathering to share our wonderful news with the people who mattered most. I agreed enthusiastically. It was going to be perfect. The dinner party was set for Saturday evening at our apartment. Natalie spent the week planning the menu and decorating, more excited than I'd seen her in months. She was glowing with the anticipation of her big reveal, completely unaware that I was planning a revelation of my own. I played my part perfectly. I helped with the shopping, offered suggestions for the menu, even bought a bottle of sparkling cider for a toast. To anyone watching, I was the picture of an expectant father, nervous and excited about sharing our news. Eric arrived with Jessica and their 2 kids, bringing flowers for Natalie and a bottle of expensive whiskey for me. He clapped me on the back with what I now recognized as guilt, masquerading as enthusiasm. "Looking good, man," he said, his smile just a little too wide. "Married life suits you." "Thanks, brother," I replied, using the term we'd always used for each other, watching him flinch almost imperceptibly. "It really does." Both sets of parents arrived within minutes of each other, and soon our small living room was filled with conversation and laughter. Natalie was in her element, playing the perfect hostess, accepting compliments on the meal and deflecting questions about when we might have big news to share. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for dessert, Natalie stood up and cleared her throat. "Actually, Liam and I do have something to tell everyone." She looked at me expectantly, and I stood up beside her, wrapping my arm around her waist in what must have looked like a supportive gesture. I could feel Eric's eyes on us from across the room. "We're pregnant," Natalie announced, her voice bright with joy. The room erupted in celebration. Her mother burst into tears, my father started talking about grandchildren, and Jessica jumped up to hug Natalie. Eric offered congratulations with the appropriate level of surprise, but I caught the way his hand trembled slightly when he raised his glass for the toast. "To new beginnings," I said, lifting my own glass, looking directly at Eric as I spoke. We let the celebration continue for about 10 more minutes. Natalie was basking in the attention, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about due dates and baby names. The happiness in the room was genuine and infectious, which made what came next even more devastating. "Actually," I said, speaking loud enough to cut through the conversation, "there's something else I need to share with everyone tonight." The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. Natalie looked confused but not concerned, probably expecting some sweet addition to the announcement. I walked to the kitchen and returned with a manila envelope I'd hidden in the pantry earlier that day. "This is difficult to say," I began, my voice steady and calm, "but I think everyone deserves to know the truth about this pregnancy." Natalie's face started to change, confusion shifting to concern. "Liam, what are you—" "The truth is," I continued, opening the envelope and pulling out the first document, "I am completely sterile. I have been since I was 13 years old due to a childhood illness. It is medically impossible for me to father children." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, someone's sharp intake of breath, the sound of a glass being set down too hard on the coffee table. "I have here," I said, holding up the medical records, "documentation from my doctor confirming my sterility dated from last week. Complete azoospermia, 0 sperm count, absolutely no possibility of natural conception." Natalie had gone completely white. "Liam, this is—" "I also have," I continued, pulling out the next set of documents, "extensive evidence of my wife's 4-month affair with Eric Thornton, including hotel receipts, photographs, text message transcripts, and DNA evidence confirming that Eric is the biological father of the child she's carrying." I handed the paternity test results to Natalie's father, who was sitting closest to me. His face went from confusion to horror as he read the document. "Security camera footage from the Fairmont Hotel showing Natalie and Eric entering and leaving together on 17 separate occasions over the past 4 months, I said, distributing more photos around the room. Eric had stood up and was backing toward the door, but I wasn't finished with him yet. "And finally," I said, pulling out the last document, "divorce papers, already filed with the court, including a complete disavowal of paternity and a request for asset protection based on adultery and fraud." The room exploded into chaos. Natalie's mother was crying, demanding to know if this was some kind of sick joke. My father was staring at the DNA results in disbelief. Jessica was looking between Eric and the door like she was planning her own escape route. But I wasn't done yet. "Eric," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "I need you to know that as the biological father, you're now legally responsible for child support. I've made sure the court has all the documentation they need to establish paternity." He finally found his voice. "Liam, man, I can explain—" "Actually, you can't," I said, "because I have 4 months of text messages where you both discussed how stupid and boring I am, how easy it was to deceive me, and how you planned to let me raise your child while you continued your affair." I turned to address the room one final time. "I want everyone to understand that this isn't anger talking. This isn't an emotional breakdown. This is justice. Natalie chose to destroy our marriage rather than end it honestly. She chose to commit paternity fraud rather than tell me the truth. And Eric chose to betray 20 years of friendship rather than respect my marriage. I walked to the front door and opened it. Now I'm choosing to make sure everyone knows exactly who they really are. I suggest you all figure out what you're going to do next, because I'm done pretending this family exists. I grabbed my overnight bag from the closet. I'd packed it that morning, and walked out of my own apartment, leaving behind the wreckage of 8 people's lives. The week that followed was the most satisfying of my life. I'd booked a suite at a downtown hotel for a month, giving myself space to watch the destruction unfold from a comfortable distance. The divorce proceedings moved forward with ruthless efficiency. Catherine Morrison had been right. The evidence was so overwhelming that Natalie's lawyer advised her to accept our terms rather than fight a battle she couldn't win. But the real entertainment came from watching the personal fallout. Within 48 hours, Eric's wife Jessica had filed for divorce and moved back to her parents' house with their children. The evidence I'd provided had made it impossible for Eric to deny or minimize his betrayal. Jessica's father, a well-connected local businessman, made sure word of the affair spread through their social and professional circles. Eric lost his job within the week. His company had a morality clause in their employment contracts, and adultery with a client's wife, they'd apparently used his work connections to book some of their hotel meetings, was grounds for immediate termination. Without his income and facing child support obligations to both Jessica and Natalie, his financial situation became dire quickly. Natalie's situation was even worse. Her conservative parents, who had always prided themselves on their family's reputation in their small religious community, were devastated by the public nature of the scandal. Her father, a deacon at their church, asked her to stay away until this mess could be resolved quietly. Her mother stopped taking her calls entirely. The apartment we'd shared was in my name only. I'd bought it before we were married and never added her to the deed. She had 30 days to find new housing, and with her income as a marketing coordinator, finding a place she could afford on her own while pregnant was proving nearly impossible. But the coup de grace came 2 weeks after the dinner party disaster. Eric, desperate to salvage something from his ruined life, had apparently decided that his best option was to step up and play the devoted father-to-be. He left Jessica and moved in with Natalie, promising to support her and the baby. It lasted exactly 6 days. Natalie, it turned out, wasn't interested in trading one boring relationship for another that came with financial instability and social exile. When Eric couldn't find a new job immediately, when the bills started piling up, when she realized that being with him meant accepting responsibility for his children's lives too, the romance died quickly. She kicked him out on a Thursday morning. I know because Marcus, my private investigator, was still monitoring the situation to ensure I had documentation for the divorce proceedings. His report included photos of Eric loading his possessions into his car while Natalie screamed at him from the apartment doorway. By the end of the month, both Eric and Natalie were living separately in different low-rent apartments across town. Eric was working part-time at a call center, trying to scrape together enough money for child support payments to Jessica while helping Natalie with pregnancy expenses. Natalie had been forced to take a second job waitressing on weekends to afford rent. Their affair, which had seemed so passionate and exciting when it was hidden, had turned into a grim struggle for survival now that it was their reality. Meanwhile, I was thriving. The divorce settlement had protected all of my assets. Our shared bank accounts, which I'd been funding entirely from my salary, reverted to me. The apartment, the car, the retirement savings, all mine. Natalie got exactly what she'd contributed to our marriage financially, which was virtually nothing. But more importantly, I felt free for the first time in months. The constant tension of living with someone who despised me was gone. The anxiety of trying to fix a relationship that couldn't be saved had lifted. I was sleeping better, eating better, even enjoying my work more. I'd started dating again, casually at first, but I was surprised by how much interest I was generating. Apparently, being a financially stable software engineer with no children and a demonstrated commitment to honesty was attractive to a lot of women. Who knew? The final chapter of my revenge came 6 months after the dinner party, when I ran into Eric at a coffee shop near my office. He looked terrible, thin, unshaven, wearing clothes that had seen better days. When he saw me, his face went through a series of expressions: shame, anger, desperation, before settling on something like hope. "Liam," he said, approaching my table with the careful movements of someone who wasn't sure of their reception. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Sure." He sat down heavily, like a man carrying invisible weight. "I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need you to know how sorry I am. What we did, there's no excuse for it." I sipped my coffee and waited. "Natalie and I, we're over. Have been for months. The whole thing was just... it was stupid. Selfish. I threw away everything that mattered for something that wasn't even real." "Okay," I said. "Jessica won't even let me see my kids except for supervised visits. I'm living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. I can barely make my child support payments." His voice cracked slightly. "I lost everything, man. My family, my job, my friends. Everyone knows what I did." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds rough." "The thing is," he continued, leaning forward desperately, "I keep thinking about how good things used to be. You and me, we were brothers. Our families were friends. Remember that camping trip we took last summer? Your barbecues? Game nights?" "I remember. I miss that, Liam. I miss having you as a friend. I miss the life I had before I screwed everything up." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "Is there any chance, any possibility, that we could work toward forgiveness? I know it would take time, and I know I don't deserve it. But maybe eventually." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had been my closest friend for 20 years, who had stood beside me at my wedding, who had known about my medical condition and still chosen to sleep with my wife and let me believe I was going to be a father. "Eric," I said finally, my voice calm and measured, "I need you to understand something. What you did wasn't just adultery. It wasn't just betrayal. You and Natalie were planning to let me raise your child while you continued your affair behind my back. You were going to let me love that baby, support that baby, build my entire life around being a father, all while knowing it was based on a lie." His face crumpled. I know it was wrong. You were going to steal my entire future and make me pay for the privilege. Do you understand that? You were going to take everything from me and make me grateful for it." "Liam, please." I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. "The answer is no, Eric. There will never be forgiveness. There will never be reconciliation. You made your choice, and now you get to live with the consequences." I paused at his chair, looking down at him one final time. "The difference between us is that I'm the kind of person who keeps his word. When I promised Natalie till death do us part, I meant it. When I called you my brother, I meant it. When I trusted you with my friendship, I meant it." I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door. "You're the kind of person who throws away 20 years of friendship for 4 months of excitement. That's who you are, Eric. That's who you've always been. I just finally see it clearly." I walked out into the Seattle sunshine, leaving him sitting alone at the table with his regrets and his consequences. 3 blocks away, I got a text from my new girlfriend asking if I wanted to grab dinner that evening. I smiled and texted back yes, then deleted Eric's number from my phone. Some stories end with redemption and forgiveness. This wasn't one of them. This was a story about choices and consequences, about the difference between boring and reliable, about what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness. Natalie and Eric had chosen excitement over stability, passion over loyalty, deception over honesty. They'd gotten exactly what they'd chosen, a chaotic, unstable life built on lies that collapsed the moment it was exposed to the light. I'd chosen differently. I'd chosen justice over revenge, strategy over emotion, truth over comfortable fiction, and I was the one who got to walk away into the sunshine, free and clear, while they lived forever with the wreckage they'd created. As I walked back to my office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine happiness. Not just relief or satisfaction, but actual joy at the life I was building. It turned out that boring was exactly what I'd wanted all along. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.